absolutely.
Fun.
Now, you got a motion picture career.
Do you remember her? She wasn't just a voice on the radio. She was the radio. For a time. In the early 1980s, Laura Branigan's voice could stop you mid-step. Powerful, soaring, full of emotion. She didn't sing at you. She reached you. If you were there, if you danced under colored lights, if you sat by the stereo late at night with her songs playing, then you remember Gloria. You remember self-control. You remember her. She had a look, a presence. The wild curls, the fierce eyes, the way she stood on stage like she had nothing to prove and everything to say. But then, she disappeared. Not overnight. Not with headlines or scandal, just quietly. Her songs stopped playing as often. Her name faded from the covers. And before most even realized it, she was gone. But for those who were there, who lived those years, who felt her music, the memory never left. This is the story of Laura Branigan, a voice that defined a moment, a life that carried far more silence than most ever knew. Before the lights, before the fame, she was just Laura, a shy, sensitive girl from Brewster, New York. She grew up in a modest home, the fourth of 5 children, in a quiet town where dreams felt far away. But even then, people noticed something different. There was a strength in her voice, even as a child. A kind of raw, untamed beauty that didn't quite fit the small-town mold. When she was still young, Laura lost her father. It was sudden, painful, and it changed her. Friends would later say she carried a kind of quiet sadness after that. The kind that shows up in someone's eyes long before it ever reaches their words. But Laura didn't break. Instead, she turned inward and toward music. She studied acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. She had the look, the presence, but it was her voice that kept pulling her back to the stage again and again. Deep, husky, full of power and vulnerability all at once. It wasn't the sweet pop voice of the moment. It was something older, richer, unforgettable. She left school before graduating. Not because she couldn't make it, but because the dream was already calling. She sang backup vocals, sent out demo tapes, knocked on doors in an industry that wasn't always kind to women who didn't fit the mold. But Laura wasn't trying to fit. She had no interest in being someone else. She just wanted to be heard. And when people did hear her, really heard her, they didn't forget. Her voice had that rare magic. It didn't ask for your attention. It commanded it. Long before the world knew her name, Laura Branigan already carried everything she needed, right there, in her chest, in her heart, in that voice. It was 1982, and the world was changing. Pop music pulsed with energy, dance floors shimmered with neon light, and radio stations across the country were tuned into something new, something bold. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, came Gloria. Laura Branigan didn't know what the song would become when she recorded it. A reimagined version of an Italian pop hit with a heartbeat that refused to slow down. But the moment it hit the airwaves, something clicked. Her voice, that rich, powerful, unmistakable voice, cut through everything. It was urgent, full of longing, impossible to ignore. The song exploded, not just as a hit, but as a presence. It climbed the charts and stayed there week after week, as if it had nowhere else to go. Listeners didn't just love it, they felt it, and with it, they felt her. Laura wasn't simply performing, she was delivering something raw and real, something you didn't quite expect from a woman who, just months earlier, had been unknown to most of the world. Suddenly, her face was everywhere. Her voice became a fixture in cars, in clubs, in bedrooms late at night. She was nominated for a Grammy. She toured the world. She stood beneath stage lights that now belonged to her, not borrowed, not shared, but earned. And yet, even in that success, Laura never lost the vulnerability that lived inside her music. She stood tall, yes, commanding stages and captivating audiences. But there was always a flicker of something more delicate beneath the surface. Something that reminded you she hadn't come from fame, but from somewhere quieter, somewhere real. As Gloria followed her from stage to stage, show to show, it became more than a song. It became an anthem, a signature, a shadow. Fans demanded it, promoters expected it, and Laura, though grateful, sometimes felt like it was the only part of her people wanted to see. Years later, she would say it was both a gift and a burden. And perhaps, like many artists before her, she carried the weight of her biggest success with quiet grace, even when it began to define her more than she ever intended. Still, in those early years, there was no denying it. Laura Branigan had arrived, and for those who remember the first time they heard Gloria, really heard it, they'll tell you. It wasn't just a song, it was a moment, and she was unforgettable. By 1984, Laura Branigan was no longer just a rising star. She was a force. Her voice had already proven it could carry a song into the hearts of millions, but now, with the release of Self-Control, it was doing something even more powerful. It was commanding attention in a way that felt both mesmerizing and a little unsettling. The song itself had a pulse like no other. Darker, edgier, filled with an almost cinematic tension. And Laura, in the music video that would become iconic, stood in black, eyes fierce, presence electric. It wasn't just a performance, it was a statement. To many, she became the embodiment of strength, mysterious, fearless, in full control. But for Laura, the truth was more complicated. What the world saw was an image, carefully curated, endlessly replayed, projected on screens and magazines. The woman in the spotlight seemed untouchable, the kind who didn't waver, who didn't bend. But away from the cameras, Laura was still soft-spoken, reflective, even shy at times. She didn't crave that spotlight. She respected it, worked within it, but never fully belonged to it. She understood the power of self-control, the way it resonated with people, the way it set her apart. But with each performance, each appearance, she also felt the quiet weight of being mistaken for the version of herself that existed only on stage. The more she was celebrated for being bold and commanding, the harder it became for people to see the gentle, emotional woman who simply wanted to sing songs that meant something. That disconnect began to wear on her. She smiled through interviews, thanked her fans with genuine warmth, and gave everything on stage. But inside, she wrestled with a growing feeling that the music was being overshadowed by the persona the world expected her to uphold. And yet, she never let it harden her. Even when misunderstood, even when molded by an industry that often cared more for image than soul, Laura never stopped singing from the most honest place she had, her heart. For those who remember Self-Control, the memory may begin with a music video, a rhythm, a lyric. But for those who truly listened, who heard not just the power in her voice, but the feeling beneath it, that song meant something more. It wasn't about dominance, it was about fragility hidden inside strength, and no one delivered that balance quite like she did. At the height of her fame, when her voice echoed across continents and her songs filled stadiums, Laura Branigan found something far away from the noise, something simple, steady, and deeply personal. She found love. Larry Krutek wasn't in the music business. He wasn't part of the stage lights or the long tours. But for Laura, that was part of what made him feel like home. They married in 1981, just before Gloria would catapult her into international stardom. And through the whirlwind that followed, the non-stop performances, the expectations, the endless attention, Larry remained a quiet constant beside her, grounding her in a world that so often felt like it was spinning too fast. Laura once said that Larry was the one who reminded her who she was before all of it. Not the singer, not the star, just the woman. And when he became ill, When cancer entered their lives like an unwelcome shadow, there was no question what she would do. She walked away from the stage. There were no dramatic headlines, no grand announcements. She simply stepped back. While the world wondered where she had gone, she was at home by his side, not as an artist, but as a wife, a caregiver, a companion in the quiet fight they never asked for. For years, she stayed out of the spotlight, away from cameras, choosing instead the kind of presence that doesn't need to be seen to be real. And when Larry passed away in 1996, Laura's world dimmed in a way no stage light could ever fix. She didn't rush back into music. In truth, for a long time, she didn't know if she ever could. The part of her that sang with so much feeling had broken, and she carried that silence with her, gently, almost protectively, as if to say, some grief doesn't want to be shared with the world. People around her said she changed, not hardened, never hardened, but softer still, more inward. She kept herself close, surrounded by a few trusted friends, staying mostly out of view as the years quietly moved on. And yet, in those quiet years, the ones without applause or encores, there was something profoundly human in the way she chose love over legacy, presence over performance. It was a chapter few saw, but one that defined her just as much as the music ever did. Years passed. The world of music evolved. New stars rose, trends shifted, and the name Laura Branigan slowly began to fade from the headlines. But somewhere in the stillness, a quiet voice remained, and it hadn't forgotten how to sing. In the early 2000s, Laura began to return. Not with a media campaign or a dramatic comeback, but in the way that felt most natural to her. Gently, sincerely. She started performing again, mostly in small venues, sometimes in front of audiences who remembered her clearly, sometimes in front of those who only vaguely recognized the name. And yet, when she opened her mouth to sing, that voice, seasoned by time but still unmistakably hers, had the power to make people stop and listen. She began working on new material, exploring songs she had written but never released. There was talk of an album, whispers of something fresh but grounded in who she truly was. And though the industry had changed, Laura wasn't trying to chase it. She wasn't looking to reclaim a spotlight. She was just looking to reconnect with what music had always meant to her: truth, feeling, and human connection. But even with that genuine spark, the road back wasn't easy. Radio had moved on. Television had moved on. The spaces once filled by her sound were now occupied by faster, younger voices. There was no malice in it, just time doing what time always does. The silence that had followed her years away had become permanent in certain corners of the world. Still, she carried herself with grace. She performed with the same heart she always had, whether it was for a small crowd or a larger room. She met fans who told her that her music had helped them through heartbreak, through grief, through moments they hadn't shared with anyone else. And for Laura, that was more than enough. She began teaching too, quietly guiding younger singers, sharing stories of the stage, of the business, and of the importance of staying true to yourself when everything around you demands otherwise. They listened not just to her advice, but to the way she spoke, calm, reflective, with a kind of peace that can only come from someone who has walked through fire and learned how to carry the warmth without the burn. It was not a comeback in the way the industry defines it, but in a more human sense, Laura had returned, not to reclaim what she'd lost, but to stand once more in the space where she had always belonged, between melody and meaning. And just as she was beginning to find that rhythm again, life once more had its own quiet plan. In the final stretch of her life, Laura Branigan was beginning to feel like herself again. There was a quiet optimism in the air, not loud or triumphant, but gentle, like a song just starting to find its rhythm. She had settled in the countryside of New York, close to her mother, close to nature, and far from the demands of a world that had once asked too much of her. Those around her said she seemed happy. She was rehearsing again, planning new performances, speaking of ideas for songs she wanted to finish. She smiled more, spoke with warmth, and had begun imagining what the next chapter might look like, not as a comeback, but as a return to something true. And then, on August 26, 2004, everything stopped. She passed away in her sleep, quietly, without warning. A brain aneurysm. Sudden, irreversible. She was only 47. There was no build-up, no months of headlines. Just the stillness of a world waking up to a silence it hadn't expected. For many, it didn't seem real. How could someone so full of life, so full of sound, be gone in an instant? But sometimes, life doesn't give us the arc we hope for. Sometimes, it ends in the middle of a verse. Her passing didn't fill the news cycles. There were no large tributes on television. But those who remembered, really remembered, felt the loss deeply. Fans lit candles. Old friends played her records at home. And suddenly, Gloria was on the radio again, not as a nostalgic hit, but as a farewell. Laura's ashes were scattered along the Long Island Sound, a place she had always loved. No stage, no crowd, just the wind, the sky, and the sound of waves lapping the shore. In the end, she left the way she had lived much of her life, quietly, gracefully, with more depth than the world ever truly knew. Laura Branigan may have left this world quietly, but what she left behind has never truly gone. It lingers, not just in her music, but in the memories tied to it, stitched into the lives of those who once danced, cried, or simply sat still with her voice in the background. Her songs weren't just recordings, they were moments. For some, Gloria was the sound of youth, of late nights, of reckless freedom, of dancing like tomorrow didn't matter. For others, "How am I supposed to live without you?" held the ache of goodbye, the weight of things left unsaid. Her voice carried the full range of what it meant to feel human, vulnerable, strong, heartbroken, hopeful, sometimes all at once. Even now, her name may not come up often. She may not top playlists or fill arenas anymore. But in quiet corners, where memory speaks louder than fame, she is still there. She is there in the voice that still makes someone pause at the sound of the first note. She is there in the woman who grew up singing into a hairbrush, eyes closed, pretending she was her. She is there in the man who still remembers the cassette tape he wore out from playing her album over and over again. Her legacy isn't written in awards or numbers, though she had plenty. It's written in people. In hearts she reached without ever needing to shout. In the dignity with which she lived and the honesty with which she sang. Laura never tried to be more than she was. And in that, she became something timeless. Not every story needs a grand ending. Some, like Laura Branigan's, are meant to stay with us in smaller, quieter ways, in a song that comes on unexpectedly, in a lyric that still hits too close, in a voice that carries more than just melody. If you remember her, you're not alone. If her music was there during your youth, your heartbreak, your joy, then part of her lives on in you. That's the kind of legacy that doesn't fade with time. It lingers, it softens, it returns when you least expect it, and stays just long enough to remind you of who you were and who you still are. Laura didn't leave behind noise, she left behind feeling, and in a world that moves too fast, that's a rare and beautiful thing. So if you hear Gloria playing in the distance someday, in a car passing by or from the corner of an old cafe, let yourself smile. Let yourself remember, because she's still singing, just quietly now.